and he thought it was at a future date.
All right, so maybe I'll hopefully reach out to him and reschedule it. I know he's in Japan, so it is a bit of a different time zone. So David, what else is happening? Charles Moskowitz here, Monday through Friday, 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. As I forge forward with the program, I want to welcome Sprecher on board. We have them as a new live streamer, and they seem to be pretty good. You know, I have them linked onto the website, charlesmoskowitz.com, as a simply as an audio live streamer. So if people don't want to watch the program on Rumble, they can click on Listen Live and get the same show on Sprecher. And I also had a guest on the other day where I did live stream it on YouTube, and I have the YouTube station, but I'm being very selective about what I put on YouTube because of censorship. I don't want to lose that station. So, I just do that occasionally. What's happening with you, David?
Thank God. But probably not good for tonight. Today, God forbid, is at least the United Nations designated Holocaust Memorial Day. Maybe I could prep you a little bit. Maybe it'll work out a little bit better, that I'll be able to tell you a little bit about Ryan Dawson before you speak to him. So it'll be a more productive conversation. And he's more political conspiracy theory, probably more the type stuff that it just doesn't interest me enough to
Well,
research.
I've heard enough of his video tapes over the years, and he's very bright, he's very intellectual, and he's very well read, and he's got some pretty deep knowledge. He almost comes across as someone who maybe even has some inside information on things. At least he speaks with such authority that you get that sense. But he's also,
he took high birth, I'm not sure, like mafia or something like that. But he even says like his father, uncle was a pallbearer at I forget, it was President Ford's funeral.
right?
And he's a tough guy too. He's like, I think he even did like MMA or some sort of
Right.
martial arts. But I mean, like he's an anti-war activist.
Yes.
So ironically, and because unfortunately we're probably going to talk about anti-Semitism again, and so he's one of kind of like the philo-Semitic anti-Semites, where he is pretty friendly to Jews. He honestly believes in these theories, and he'll probably try to convince you that you're right, and like a Fordism type thing, where he thinks that that there's some extremely bad actors in the Jewish community, and we should be warned and not cover up for these people. But to some extent, he's philo-Semitic like that. Like he'll probably speak to you friendly and probably speak to you
Oh yeah, no, and
honestly,
I
like
got the
he's
sense
trying to change your mind. Like
he's
he thinks you could
he's
be.
got an anti-Zionist thing he's got going there, and he feels that Israel is somehow connected in with international order, and the Mossad is connected through Jeffrey Epstein, and he's got a lot of that kind of stuff, which I probably wouldn't necessarily disagree with. I mean, I do think that Israel is very much plays ball with the world order. I mean, they do. I mean, I think that maybe Israel's motivations in doing so might be a bit different than the deep state in the United States, in that they're not interested in a one world informal government. I think Israel does it for national reasons. Israel is trying to preserve its own sovereignty, its own freedom. It's trying to preserve the peace. It doesn't want to have a war. And I think that they're willing to do some pretty extraordinary, and I would even suggest unsavory things from time to time in order to reach that goal. And for that, they don't need to make any excuses. Anyway, David, what else is happening? I heard an interview with Jonathan Greenblatt on with Christiana Amanpour from, he's very tricky. I mean, most of the stuff he says I agree with, but he's very partisan. He kind of has all this kind of implication that somehow President Trump was playing footsie with white supremacists, which is completely false. I've never seen evidence of that. And that he had white supremacists, his media involved in the White House, which I don't believe is true at all. I'd like to see some proof of that. And then he kind of implies that somehow, there were white supremacists that Trump, gave a pass to at Charlottesville, which is untrue, and that there were white supremacists at the protest at the U.S. Capitol, and he points to some of these, symbols that people apparently were wearing on T-shirts that are mean, like white supremacy and anti-Semitism and Jewish conspiracy theory. And I don't know, that may be true, but that doesn't reflect on Trump or on conservatives. And those guys that were wearing that stuff, from what we're learning about the incursion in the U.S. Capitol, as that story continues to unravel, they very well could have been FBI agents to try to set this up to make it look even worse as part of, I think, a very coordinated effort. What do you think about Greenblatt over at the ADL? I mean, what is their deal?
I think they're just kind of incompetent. I mean, they might have some good intentions. They might legitimately, be scared of rising anti-Semitism or have some sort of universal humanistic, agenda that is. I would probably largely agree with that. They're pushing. I'm a universal humanist, but I think they're largely incompetent, and they're caught up with their donors, and so really they're just largely pushing some sort of leftist agenda based on their donor base. That I mean, they do other stuff, but like any institution, they get a majority of their funding from a minority of places, and they're not necessarily just like these altruistic people that want to benefit civil rights and help out small Jews that are getting picked on. They have a political agenda, and more that's more related to getting candidates elected, although they do monitor anti-Semitism. Like, they are a decent watchdog. They have a payroll enough that they're probably the best watchdog agency. I was watching, we said that there's 100 different that they call extremists running for public office, and they're monitoring them. And
I'd like to see how they define that, but I think you're right in that.
I don't think my source is just from a single person not working with anybody that I think I know a lot better than.
Do they include Ilhan Omar in that, and Rashida Tlaib, your congresswoman? I bet you they don't. But David, my thing is, you're right about noting that they are beholden to the big donors, and that the big money in the Jewish world is very left. You don't find too many ultra wealthy Jews who are not on the left. That's an interesting phenomena in and of itself. I think that's just a fact.
Donald Trump was a major donor. I mean, he donated, I think, even like at least 50,000, maybe even more. He donated large sums of money to the ADL.
Oh, okay. Well, back then he was a liberal, but
I think he was just a political player.
And Donald Trump was an institutional donor. There are two types of donors. There are the institutional donors, and I know this from having run for office. There are the institutional donors, and there are the ideological donors. The institutional donors are just trying to bet on the right horse. They want the winner. So they usually will donate to both sides. They'll throw a little money here, a little money there. Whereas the ideological donors, both on the left and on the right, they want to see something happen. They're interested in an idea, and they'll give a lot of money for that. And to me, it looks like most of the Jewish donors tend to be ideologically left. Although one exception, I think, is the late Sheldon Adelson. His issue was Israel, and he was willing to donate to either left or right if he felt that they were going to be pro-Israel. But one of the comments,
there's a substantial amount of, right-wing Jewish money and right-wing. I mean, just like here in Michigan, Ron Wiesner that we talked about, University of Michigan, Governor Whitmer gave the State of the State yesterday. I mean, because 25% of Jews are Republican, and historically, that even been the wealthier Jews that were more likely to be Republican. Even my mother's law firm.
Why is the ADL
maybe even like 50? Well, because it's an interest group and it's pushing an agenda. So it's saying that it's.
Yeah, but if their donors are right wing, then why are they?
They're not. They're saying that right wing people don't donate to the ADL because right wing people generally favor free speech, and so the agenda that.
So they don't give to the ADL. The ADL gets the left wingers.
Yeah, but I'm saying that there's a substantial. It's not like just Sheldon Adelson. That I would say that there's a huge amount of Jewish, at least financial power, probably in the Republican Party in most states. But Um,
I
and
mean,
not
I
to
think
get,
that a
I
lot of
wanted to
this
go back to
book,
Ryan Dawson for a minute, but I mean,
all
just
right,
also business interest that if you're pushing something like an ideology, like you want to push the direction of politics in America on an idealism way, one way or another, you're probably going to um, pick one party unless somehow you're in a good situation where both sides favor your issue, like if there's historically maybe support for Israel, or but big business and Jews in the business community, um where the purpose is business interest, that you need your interest answered no matter which party is there.
that's right. Well, they're the more institutional type donors,
And so
but
if you're talking like Jewish professions like real estate, so I mean historically there's been certain professions that have been on the right, like that Jews have been very prominent in, like real estate, construction related ones, that most people in those profession are on the right. However, the corporate world and the technological world has shifted to the left. So
right.
Greenblatt comes from Silicon Valley,
So the big tech
and
that they left, yeah.
I mean,
I
so
think,
some like some even if you're in New York, if you're in real estate, you might have right wing leanings, but it said like you're only dealing with left wing politicians. Uh, and I'd mentioned this book a few times. Leila Corwin Berman, who wrote the Jewish philanthropic complex, like the industrial complex. And I actually saw recently there was more things that it was actually partially the Jewish federations that lobbied certain tax laws, and even like you get messages from the ADL, you get messages from the federation talking about the direction of certain tax laws and the ability to create foundations and have the charity given in a certain manner, so
mhm.
so that if you're mega wealthy and the tax laws set up in a certain way, that you could put hundreds of millions of dollars in a foundation as opposed to it being taxed or tens of millions, make
Right,
where
and often those foundations, you can do it anonymously, like the Tides Foundation, which is very left wing. But David, I just also, the other two comments that Jonathan
I mean,
made.
that would be bipartisan in that manner, and like the JCRC. I mean, because Jews mostly live in urban places that are dominated by Democratic politicians. So almost all
Right,
federations where federations have power are in blue areas. But on a state level, um, you need ties in saying that not necessarily the federations or the Jewish organizations, but the prominent Jewish business people, like here in Michigan, Max Fisher was a Republican, even though he was head of the federation. He,
mhm,
he supported Nixon and was a national Republican, but he was so wealthy that he was still head of the federation, even though the federation was
yeah,
to the left, and he kind of single-handedly had Republican connections, as like a standout. But he had to be really wealthy. He had to be a billionaire.
right,
So like
exactly.
that's what I
Right
said. Like
on.
certain power, like as a Jewish Republican, uh, on a statewide level, because usually you're going to come from an urban area that's blue.
Mhm.
Um, God forbid the anti-Semitic trope, but like no, you got to write really really big checks. You got to be able to afford to give thousands, tens of thousands of dollars
To get in
to
there, yeah.
hundreds, thousands, like Sheldon Adelson, but even like Ron Wiesner here in Michigan,
Mhm.
he's a billionaire. He's no Sheldon Adelson, but he's given thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars to hundreds of Republicans, every
Okay.
election cycle.
All right, but apparently the ADL, as you say, is Silicon Valley. It tends to be liberal. But the other comments that were made, this wasn't actually made by him. It was made by the interviewer, who was not Christiana Amanpour. It was this other guy. He said, well, what do you do about these conspiracy theories about Jews, controlling everything? And then he specifically mentioned George Soros by name. And he said all these theories about Soros starting all these, organizations that are involved in, radical politics. And Jonathan did not challenge that, and I really resent that, because people are concerned about George Soros not because he happens to have a Jewish background, and that Jewish background is very, very interesting, given the fact that he helped the Nazis identify Jews in Hungary when he was a teenager, and he remembers that with his fondest memories, and that he's an atheist, a self-declared atheist, and that he's anti-Israel, but and donates to radical causes. But it's because the stuff he's involved in, the causes that he's involved in, are legitimate grounds for criticism. And to complain, to say, well, if you criticize George Soros, you must be an anti-Semite. That's a way to shut down a very important conversation, because the fact of the matter is that he has helped finance secretaries of state's elections around the country, including your Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, and district attorneys' elections around the country, who are promoting.
Abdul Said, was a Soros scholar, almost
Yeah.
ran for governor.
And
he
they
was literally a Soros scholar on scholarship. And like, that's literally on his resume. He's a Soros scholar.
Oh, it's very open, and they have particular agendas. In the cases of the secretaries.
Well,
of
he was
state,
nice to me. Like, I met Abdul Said, and he was kind of like I was helped out by the Jews, like George Soros, and I, so
I must love that. Yeah, but the thing is,
but it's a fine line.
Let me just say this, David. He has a particular agenda that has nothing to do with Judaism or Jews. He wants to put in secretaries of state so they can cheat on the election against Donald Trump.
You're taking a negative. You say, like, no, I mean, his agenda does have to do with his understanding of Judaism.
I doubt it. And also
because you don't know him, and it's saying, but
no, I don't know him. But
if you're an organization that's being funded by him, and you say, like, no, he cares deeply about Judaism or his understanding of Judaism.
I don't think
even if you're from understanding, and he funds.
It has nothing to do with Judaism. He's
saying that
the funding of the district
you
attorney.
have no place to say that.
I don't have.
Just because you're a Jew,
do you have a place to say it does? I mean, look.
Yeah, because you're saying
his interview on the
funded by him.
No,
people that say that he
that they say he's doing this as a Jew. Who cares? He's funding district attorney races for people to give a low bail on people, so that, like, this guy that ran the car into the Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, he let that guy out on $1,000 bail. They're interested in this agenda of reducing bail around the country. They're interested in not prosecuting crimes other than murder, and prosecuting crimes based upon race and other
like Sheldon Adelson
agendas.
Saying that,
I'm not talking about Sheldon Adelson. I'm talking
if you
about
said that
George
Sheldon Adelson's
Soros.
Judaism has nothing to do with it. He's not really.
Well, I don't know that, but what I do know is
but you do know that about George Soros.
What I know is that
Judaism is a deeply
even if it did, it doesn't matter.
Driving factor.
George Soros is
do,
funding radical leftist things in this country, like he is buying an election to stop and to remove Donald Trump from office. He is funding district attorneys who are letting people out on low bail who are violent criminals deliberately, including, by the way, Massachusetts former district attorney Rachel Rollins, and a whole list of others around the country. He's given them money. And the criticism of this is because he is acting as a radical leftist, and he has a leftist agenda, not because he's a Jew. Now, if he personally...
What about, maybe it is because he's a Jew. So, I mean, why are you saying
it's not because he's a Jew?
Maybe it is because he's
a
Jew.
No, it is not because... Well, is he...
How do you know?
Wait a minute.
Why are you so insistent on saying...
Wait a minute, we have a misunderstanding here, We have a misunderstanding here, David. My claim is that the criticism of him by people on the conservative side is not because he's a Jew. It's because he's a radical leftist. The fact that he happens to have a Jewish background, regardless of how that is or what that means to him, is irrelevant. The point is
the fact that
there would be brought up
is a major factor in his motivation.
It doesn't matter to me.
It doesn't matter to the
no, and I doubt if it is, but even if it is, it doesn't matter. It's not relevant. And the fact that this would be brought up by Christiana Amanpour's program and would not be a challenge by Jonathan Greenblatt is as a way to silence criticism against George Soros. In other words, if you criticize George Soros, a radical leftist who has put in agendas going back 20 years, you're an anti-Semite. You're criticizing him because he's allegedly a Jew. Even if he is a Jew, it doesn't matter. But my point here is that that has nothing to do with the criticism of George Soros. Even if he was a devout Jew and he was doing it for Jewish reasons, which I doubt. I don't know that, but based on the interview, whoopsie daisy, my chair is collapsing here.
If George Soros combines forces and donating power with the ADL on causes. And so Greenblatt's going to defend him and say that, like, no, I mean, George Soros is, in his version, acting out of his concern for Judaism or his understanding of Judaism.
I
And that's
doubt
one of
that.
his strong motivating factors. I don't
Fine.
doubt it. I would say most Jews, Judaism is an extremely important identity, and he survived the Holocaust. And I
He
would
didn't
not be
survive the
surprised if his
Holocaust.
Judaism is the
He
single
he he
strongest
reveled.
motivating factor in
No,
his
wait a minute.
actions. You would reject that George Soros's Judaism is not the single strongest motivating
Yes, I
factor
do.
in his actions?
I don't know
Is
that, but
Judaism the single strongest motivating factor in your actions?
no, but it's a big factor, but I doubt if it is in his. I think that his,
I would say all Jews. It's
would
going to be,
agree.
say like, is that anti-Semitic? But say like, no, Judaism is a strong identity, and it's an
He doesn't even
it's
identify himself.
from the single most important motivating factor in basically all Jews.
Yeah, but look, it may be, it may not be, it's not relevant to me. The fact is that his interview in with 60 Minutes, his famous interview, he said that he's an atheist, that that he was proud of the fact that as a teenager, he helps his father identify Jews to
We're
the
going to get too
Nazi.
far off the topic with this, but I say even with all that, like, I would still say, I mean, it's basic Hasidus, or you're still like, no, I mean, Judaism is still probably up there, if not the single
It doesn't
most
matter.
strong motivating factor.
Yeah,
And saying at
maybe.
this, even people on the opposite side of the divide, right or left, that Judaism, and
But I
to
don't
go
really,
back to Ryan
yeah,
Dawson and the
I don't, well,
conspiracy
okay, well,
theory,
let's go back to Ryan Dawson.
what does it mean? Like,
I
okay,
just
like
want
the
to, I just want to finish up the Soros thing. I doubt if Judaism means that much to him, and even if it did, I don't care. I'm interested for the same reason conservatives are interested in his actions, nothing to do with his Jewish background. It has to do with the fact that he's destroying this country with his radical ideas and he's financing them. And I resent the idea that to criticize those radical actions because he has a Jewish background, somehow we're to be called anti-Semitic. And I resent the fact that Jonathan Greenblatt let that comment slide without challenging that. The criticism of George Soros is not because he has a Jewish background, however that might mean. It is because of his radical politics and the fact that he bought an election to destroy Trump, and he got these stooges like what's her face over there in Michigan to carry out that agenda. That's the criticism of him, not because he's Jewish. And the fact that they would bring this up constantly, oh, you're criticizing George Soros, you must not like Jews. What is he, Moses? I mean, it's nothing to do with his Judaism.
I mean, he's just defending his donor.
And I think that's corrupt.
I don't think it's corrupt. I'm saying, I
But
mean,
if
it's really
his
just
donor is Meyer Lansky,
Citizens United.
And by the
at the
way,
end of the day,
he was a big donor to the ADL, I might add.
But it's saying like it's really just Citizens United. Money is speech. That is saying Soros has the
so you
right
can judge
to use his money.
Oh, no one denies that. But you can make a judgment on who that is who's giving the money and how it's influencing that organization. And I would suggest that that's what the criticism is.
Well, I mean, so it's like the survey that came out in France, that like how you read it, basically like 60% of French people are anti-Semites, depending on how you read it, where, I don't even consider like, Dawson, EMJ, Adam Green anti-Semites, because they're.
I don't either.
But if you read it, that like 50% of Americans think that Jews have a dual loyalty and have too much power and use that excess power to influence things in our benefit. And so that's literally like 50% of America.
Well, that's troubling.
And so, well, it's not troubling. You're saying it's factual. You're saying that, no, I mean, what's wrong?
Yeah, but it's not.
Okay, Jews came to America. We did well.
Yeah, but we don't.
We do.
We're loyal to the United States.
We do care about our own personal causes, and we use our success to advance our own personal causes. So if you're rejecting that and you're saying it's a problematic,
I'm not rejecting that. I'm saying
that's a good thing. Like,
look,
that's
saying that
that's what my rabbi say, like, you should help your people. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah, but
like, of course that's what we do.
We do it. Of course,
any Jew that's successful is going to leverage that success in order to benefit the Jewish community.
Fine,
and, like,
but
even to push back.
That's okay.
To say, like,
I don't mind that. I mean, Italians will do something with the Italian community. Look,
so, I mean, but if that's
loyal
considered
Americans, though, it's not a dual loyalty. We're doing it in the context of being Americans, and if we're not doing it in the best interest of America, like maybe George Soros isn't, then that's not good. But the thing is that the vast majority of Jews are loyal Americans, even if I don't agree with the fact they're liberal, fine. They're loyal Americans.
So I'm just
George
going to
Soros
bring
is
it back to Ryan
another
Dawson.
story.
We say like, no, because there is group
And there is no
conflict.
dual loyalty. That's
Well,
a
there is, because there is group conflict. And in the case of group conflict, what are you going to do? You're going to do what's best for the Jewish community, or are you going to do what's best
not if it contradicts the
another
American people.
identification? So it's like Ryan Dawson has multiple extremely well researched. Like I didn't care enough to look into the names of you're basically saying that Israel is not a good ally to America, and he's not anti-Zionist. Like he doesn't think like BDS, or is he just thinks that America is a bad ally to America. I actually saw on like he interviewed years ago some of the survivors of the U.S. Liberty from the attack in Israel. But I mean, his main conspiracy, going back, God forbid, he claims that the Mossad Jewish mafia was behind the assassination of Kennedy, both of them. And I like you probably know a decent amount about that, but he give you 100 names.
Why would the Mossad want to assassinate?
He'll give you 100 names of Jews you never heard of.
And
so I just say, like,
he'll
give you a name. He'll give you a list of 100
there might have been individual
Jews you never heard of.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, I don't think he's making any of those up.
No, I don't think.
I'm not looking into it by saying he'll give you a list of 100 names of Jews you never heard of.
It has nothing to do with the Jewish agenda. I mean, look, Jack Ruby, I think, was Jewish, and he shot Oswald. But why would the Jews?
I don't want to waste too much.
I don't want to waste time on it either. But I will say,
but saying I can't.
But you bring up an example.
He's going to give names.
Fine, I'll take those
facts.
Why does that? Why that doesn't therefore weave some kind of conspiracy that the Mossad and that the Jewish people wanted to assassinate Kennedy? That's ridiculous.
Well, now that doesn't. I mean, his connection.
There might be
related to the stealing of nuclear.
And
his claim is that Israel. I mean, he has names and dates, and actually,
they want to steal the nuclear bomb.
No, I mean that Israel original nuclear material was stolen from a site in America, and like I've looked up. I mean, it's documented the names. There was arrests, and that it was over the nuclear program that Kennedy was trying to crack down on Israel's nuclear program and to punish Israel for what he claims was stealing nuclear fission material from America, and that was the reason why Mossad.
Why they wanted to assassinate him? Yeah, that's far fetched. I mean,
that's. And I
understand
that he
fine. Maybe look, another conspiracy theory that I think
is the 9/11, that his claim that Mossad was the motivating factor.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've heard that.
I mean, I say he's going to give you.
Why would Mossad want
to? He's going to give you a name.
Yeah, and I'll challenge
tens of Israel IDF.
And I'll give him
documents. You never heard of these people, but like those names are probably real. And I don't have too much to look into it by saying he's going to give you names, dates, places, and documents.
David, look, first of all, I think the conspiracy theory that I've heard that actually is more plausible is that Israel stole the nuclear materials from Great Britain, not the United States. And so didn't Pakistan, by the way, through this guy Khan, who was able to get it between, there's a book about this, I interviewed the author years ago, because their security is much more lax than the United States. It's not likely. I mean, maybe they tried to steal from the United States. I don't know. Look, it's no question they stole it from somebody.
I made documentaries on these. Like, I mean,
I don't
know too much about. I'm not that political to even,
No, and look, I don't doubt that Israel probably stole some of that technology, and maybe they stole it from the United States. It didn't just come out of nowhere. But to link that to assassinating Kennedy, that's a stretch. And the 9/11 thing, why would the Mossad want to blow up the Twin Towers? I mean, that's insane.
Well, because Ryan Dawson's, if you judge him favorably, he's an anti-war activist. Fine. So he's not anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist. He's anti-war. Well,
it's just,
and say the claim was to precipitate a war in the Middle East and to get America to act against their own interest and fight a war.
Why would they want
for the benefit of Israel?
Why would it be? Well, first of all, the war against Iraq was not to the benefit of Israel. It was a disaster for Israel.
Well, I mean, you could argue that with him, but
I don't think so.
I mean, certainly there's like I constantly, I would say probably 10% of Americans would probably agree with that sentiment that we went to war, in the Middle East for Israel.
And
And
that's craziness. That's bad.
even we say
Those,
that the
that's where
synagogue,
conspiracy theories are very dangerous. You know, when you
one
get
of the what was can you fight anti-Semitism? Like the Colleyville hostage situation is somewhat precipitated off the belief that the U.S. waged war in the Middle East for the sake of Israel. And so if Ryan Dawson, you give him
I
credit
don't.
as just being an anti-war activist and saying that he believes that that the only reason America went to war was because we were
Well, that's a very that's a
duped by Israel,
very
and
simplistic
therefore he
thing.
wants to, he's willing to talk even to you and show you his, what he would consider
Okay.
indisputable
Look,
research.
I am
And
sympathetic with him in terms of being anti-war, but to suggest that Israel is like behind that, that's flimsy. I mean, to give even Israel that kind of power. I don't doubt, by the way, that the Israelis probably did want the United States to go to war in Iraq. I think that they were players in that, but I think it was a much bigger agenda than just the United States. I think it was more the Anglo-American establishment. There's a lot. It's the warmongers inside the United States who make profit from war. The people pushing right now for war against Ukraine. It's the same people. There've always been people like, one of the things that came out recently about
there was a lot of
Afghanistan.
forces that aligned. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah, that's right.
interests that had to combine, but it's like no, I mean that was a significant push of the Jewish community, and even
Wall Street has always been warlike.
somewhat major mainstream Jewish organizations, even
Oh,
Elie
I
Wiesel
don't doubt it.
in
Yeah.
AIPAC
Pushing
and
for war against
and the,
Iraq. I don't doubt that, David, but the point is that it's very simplistic to say that somehow Israel and Jewish organizations, the entire liberal elite establishment was pushing for the war. I mean,
even say like
but
Israel's.
we found out recently, if I may, that after the Afghanistan fiasco, it's now been revealed how much money the armaments people and certain industrialists made with the blood of American soldiers there over a 20-year occupation. People made fortunes from that. Wealth was centralized from that. There are people who love war. It always have been. And I think it's a combination of Wall Street. It's a combination of internationalists, globalists who want to weaken sovereignty. It's a combination of a lot of things. It's simplistic to say, well, the Israelis, yeah, maybe in this case, the Israelis might have wanted to see the United States go to war in Iraq, which was stupid. And they should never have done that because Israel's much worse off today because of that war. We would have been better off with Saddam Hussein giving a counterbalance to Iran. Now you have Iran on the borders of Israel.
Is say if you got objectively, let's say that the Israel-U.S. alliance is not in the interest of the majority of the U.S. citizens, but I'm still a U.S. Jew. I'm still a U.S. Jew, and I still support Israel.
Well, I would not support Israel.
I mean, so then the question of dual loyalty. So I could say objectively, maybe he's right.
No, I disagree with Israel.
That it's not in the interest of the United States to support Israel, but I still want.
David, I think that it is in the.
And you're going to say, like, well, who are you? You're just a Jew, and so obviously you're biased. But I mean, so who are you to say it's in the interest of the United States to support Israel? You say, like, well, no, I'm a Jew who cares deeply about Israel and a U.S. citizen. And even to say that,
David, look at it this way. I actually think it's
if Israel didn't support Israel, maybe I would consider picking up and leaving.
It's
and
probably not.
If that's like a anti-Semitic dual loyalty.
No, it's not dual loyalty. David, it's probably
but
not.
It is to someone. But that's
it is not at
McDonald in group strategy,
David,
in group conflict.
Could I get in a word edgewise? It's probably not in the interests of the United States to support Israel. Probably never was in the interests of the United States to support Israel. And as an American, I would be against Israel for urging the United States to get involved in any war, unless it was that Israel itself was being invaded. And even then, I would simply ask the United States to lend aid, not actually go to war. And the Israelis don't want Americans literally going to war if Israel's invaded. But it is not in the United States' interest to support Israel, never was. I would point to, as an example, when Israel declared its independence, or around that time, the months leading up to that, when you had the UN involved, Harry Truman was pressured by the whole WASP elite in this country, not the Jewish elite, the Council on Foreign Relations, James Forrestal, his Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of State Marshall, they all said, do not help Israel, do not recognize Israel, because if you do, you're going to alienate the Arab world, which is rich in oil and rich in resources and rich in people, and it has great lands and vast territories. We need to be allied with them. Israel has nothing. It's just a tiny strip of land. They got no oil. They've got no money. They've got nothing. And they're not even barely, going to be able to make it there. So do not support Israel. And
Well, it's an international Jewry has, and saying we as American
yeah, but the
Jews
reality is
have
that
quite
the
a
United
bit, and saying
States is
factually
not.
we do leverage our power to help Israel.
Yeah, but I know that. But David, my
and
point
that
here,
power
if
that
I
we
may,
leverage to help
was
Israel
that the United
may or may
States did
not be
not
in the
have an
interest of the greater
interest
United
in
States.
supporting Israel. That Marshall was right. That Forrestal was right. That the Council on Foreign Relations was right. The Israel had no money, no nothing, whereas the Arab world had vast oil resources, vast everything. So yeah, technically, sure, we shouldn't have supported Israel. But Truman decided to do it anyways. He decided almost alone. Even his own wife who was an anti-Semite, apparently, wouldn't even let a Jew come in the house, in the White House. He personally went and decided on his own as president to do this. And
Well,
the reason that he did it,
no, I mean, he listened to the demands of the American Jews that pushed him to do it.
no, this is my point, and I'm going to get to it. The reason that he did it was because the American people did support it, not just the Jews, but most Americans, both liberal and conservative, both Democrat and Republican, across the board, supported Israel. They supported recognizing the state of Israel, not because it was in our interest, but because the American people respect, well, there's several reasons, one of which is that we respect the right of people to have sovereignty and to have independence. And secondly, because America is Christian. And there is something about an understanding from a religious standpoint that there is a significance to the idea of the Jews gathering from exile and establishing this commonwealth. And that was the same thing amongst a lot of people in Great Britain. There was a major movement there as well. So I think that it was
you do yourself any benefit speaking on behalf of other people and just saying,
I am
like, no,
observing
me as an
history
American
here.
Jew, I will support Israel even if it goes against the
I won't.
interest of America.
No, I
And you're
won't.
saying, no, you won't.
No,
You
I
won't
won't.
support Israel if it goes
I will
against the
not
interest of
support
America.
Israel if they support something that is against America. No. But
I mean, what's the difference between you and George Soros? And then you say, will you oppose Israel? And saying that you basically
George
just saying the
Soros
same thing
is
as George
actively
Soros.
because George Soros is actively anti-Israel. He is supporting Hamas. He is supporting people who want to wipe out Israel. I would never do that, but I would not support an Israeli government that asked for something that was un-American, that was something that it was against our interests. Having said that, for reasons that are very visceral for all Americans, including even most recently polls, even on the left, they do support Israel's right to exist. Even Dawson, I heard him speak in an interview. I was doing a little prep work. He supports Israel's right to exist. He doesn't. He thinks that the Palestinians should have the West Bank. Okay, fine, but he supports the existence of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, and he said so.
Iran. I mean, the single biggest issue in Israel for the last 10 years is Iran, and even still this week, like half of the newspaper articles in Israel are about Iran,
Fine.
and half of those articles about Iran are about pressuring the United States to pressure Iran.
I don't think we should go to war against Iran.
Well, I didn't say war, but
sanctions, sure.
Even to take Israel's side over Iran's, and to say like Israel has nuclear weapons.
Why? So you think what is Iran going to do for the United States? I mean, it's an enemy of the United States, not just of Israel, but of the West.
Well, that's unclear.
I think it's very clear, and they've said so, and I believe them when they say it. I think that, and I don't think the United States needs to go to war against Iran. I'm against that. But I
mean, it's the point in hand that they're saying,
but to support Israel,
you as an American Jew are pushing for the U.S. to take Israel's side over Iran.
As far as, but not to go to war there.
I support. That's like, I mean, saying like that's a pure dual loyalty.
No, it's not,
because if your fellow non-Jewish American was just like, I don't know. I'm thinking about siding with Iran here,
Fine.
like why are we taking Israel's side over Iran?
Because Israel, because we recognize it, we
It's like
want
as a
to,
favor to you, as a
no,
favor
I
to
think
you.
because the American people at the time of Truman, right up till today, support Israel's right to exist as a sovereign Jewish state. It's not that I wouldn't support Israel if they were advanced. First of all, also support for against Iran is also support for our other allies in the region too, like Saudi Arabia, which is threatened by Iran and other countries. I don't think we need to go to war there, but I do think that we need to side with
But we are. You support
countries.
Trump. He killed their general.
That's fine. He didn't go to
Well, I was
war
saying that's
there.
fine.
He took
You'll take that blood on your hands.
yes, I
So God
will.
forbid the next terrorist that wants to get revenge for their general. You're saying that you're
He
God
killed,
forbid that
no, yeah,
any American Jew is a reasonable target because we supported the
no,
killing of their leader.
this general was one of the worst terrorists in the world. He had blood in his hands of Americans and Israelis and others. And that's a war, this was a man who was at war
Yeah,
with
but
the
you're
United
taking
States.
side in a war because Israel and Iran are at war,
I take
and there's
some,
blood on both sides. So you're saying that to say
yeah,
that
but he had killed Americans. I mean, he had also, besides Israelis, he was involved. He's a terrible terrorist who was involved. He was as bad as almost as Osama bin Laden. He was the worst terrorist in the world at that time. He threatened not just Israel, he threatened the whole West. And so, yeah, we should take him out and do so without having a war. That's how Trump did it. He didn't have an entire war. He just had the opportunity to take this one target out. That's how the Israelis do it. They don't want to have a war, but if you have someone who is planning to kill you, you take them out to keep the peace. It's the same reason why we don't let a terrorist or a criminal,
God forbid, that's what
violent
Dawson's saying.
criminal, go out on the
Dawson
street and
saying we
kill
did to
people.
Kennedy. Dawson saying, of course, and that's what we did to Kennedy too.
Who's we?
Well, I mean, we as Jews.
So he says that the Jews killed. What does that have to do with anything? I mean,
Well, just the exact logic that you were using is why he's saying that we as Jews were the ones who took
no,
out Kennedy.
I don't believe that that's true about Kennedy, though. I don't think
I don't know. I mean,
Kennedy
God forbid. I doubt
yeah,
it. Also,
that
I'm
just
saying
seems unlikely.
although Kevin Barrett also told me that.
Oh, I
I
don't. Yeah,
mean,
he don't.
that's a common, and even the God forbid the 9/11 is pretty common. I saw like politically provoked now. From uh, um they're completely banned from YouTube, and they
Yeah.
have these like conspiracy panels. They had like a 9/11 conspiracy panel, and they couldn't get like a single person who believed the narrative, and all the people that were under the conspiracy were all agreed
They
that
need to do.
it was Israel.
Yeah, these are
And if you just say like the
misrepresentations of
likelihood of delusion, you say no, there's no logic. There might have been like dancing Israelis or some connection of Israeli
that's those. They
surveillance,
need to do something.
but you're saying that people are going to blame us whether it's true or not, and what are we going to do about it? And saying, can you fight anti-Semitism in that manner? If what are we going to do? Saying
We're going
how do you approach that?
you expose it. I mean, it's those are untrue and anti-Semitically motivated tropes, and they're wrong. And it's not
Well, I
rational.
say if you expose to say that, okay, so what we've discovered is like
I mean, look, they blame
anti-Semitism.
Jews for everything, David. You know that on all
Well, I mean,
sides.
you can't use your. I mean, you can't fight anti-Semitism because all you do is expose is that people are illogical, and the reason they believe in illogical conspiracies is because there's some sort of God forbid natural deep down tendency to dislike Jews.
Well, it
And then
gets
if
to a
you
bigger
take like
question.
Orthodox religious opinion, it's like, of course, that's what my rabbis taught me. Like Mount Sinai, when God chose the Jews, it caused all the other nations to hate us. Like it says that in the Bible, it says it in the Talmud. So that's just the high price of being a Jew. Like
Well, no,
that's why
no,
your grandfather wanted to run away from it, change his name in White
change his
Pass
name.
because he was scared of the high price of what it means to be a Jew.
That's right. No, look, and it's a fascinating subject. Why is there anti-Semitism? Why do people have these bizarre conspiracy theories
Well, I was saying,
about
should there
the
be a high price to being a Jew?
I think there is a high price to being a Jew because of these kinds of conspiracy theories and this sort of hate.
Well, I was saying because
We need to understand what
because of Mount
caused it.
Sinai, because when God gave us
Right?
the Torah, it's a fact that's what our religion. That's what Adam Green is saying. It's not that Goyim are delusional and dislike Jews. That's what our religion teaches. That's what our books say. That's what all of our books say. That
That the Jews will be hated.
Well, I'm saying that's like the word Mount Sinai means Sinai, means hatred. The Torah itself says when God chose us, it caused all the nations to hate us.
Okay.
Like all of our, from the prophets to the rabbis of the Talmud till today, that's what our religion teaches. So I mean, that's kind of what Adam Green, from his
All
like
right. I mean,
perspective,
that's
that
fine.
he thinks it's a false religion, but he's saying that really we cause it ourselves, because it's really
Well,
the cause of it is our own religion, because that's what our religion teaches.
our religion teaches that other people hate us.
I mean, it does kind of, yeah.
Well, first of all, we don't
I mean,
tell
you
other
want to say it's a
people.
positive, say, okay, we're the
I know, I
chosen
don't think it's
people,
positive.
and it's a double-edged sword,
Yeah.
that there's a high price to being a Jew, and there's certain advantages, but there's certain disadvantages. And it means that when things go bad, we're going to get the blame. It's not going to be rational, but there's just going to be crazy people, like, God forbid, there was a lot more anti-Semitic violence this week. And it's just going to be so, or, like the Colleyville attack, it's just going to be some random crazy person
Well, we can
that
talk
blames
about,
the Jews and
yeah.
decides to do something about it, and it's not going to be logical or reasonable, and there's really nothing we could do about it, because it's going to be,
Well,
like
what can we do
handsome.
about it, David? I mean, we should talk about the causes of this. I mean, it's not because we want this to happen. I would point historically to an example, a classic example of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, which was in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. You had the Paris Commune, which was a communist takeover of the city of Paris, and then that collapsed, and then France collapsed, and they were defeated. And both sides blamed the Jews. The Jews were blamed for the Paris Commune because we're the authors of communism. The Jews were blamed by the left for the collapse of the communist commune because we're the authors of capitalism, and we were behind the people that stamped it out. We're not going to win either way. We
I think it
get
goes back
blamed.
to universal humanism. I mean, there's an interesting verse in, I think it's this week's parsha, Exodus and Mishpatim, that basically says we're liable for the punishment of the mistreated orphan. That the verse, I think Exodus 20:22 says, if the orphan should cry out to God, God will hear his cry, and bring the sword upon us. For that, if it makes sense from our theology, that if there's an orphan out there that is being mistreated and cries out honestly to God, that like the world was unfair to him, that as so to say, God's chosen people, we will be punished for that. And it's kind
Why
of like
would we be
The
punished?
Jesus principle. Well, I'm saying because we're God's chosen people, and if someone's unsuffering naturally, they have a complaint against God, and as God's chosen people, they have a complaint against us. So that saying, why is some random
So that
crazy
we're
mentally
caught with
disturbed or poor person um attacking Jews, because the world mistreated them, they never had a fair shot,
they
and
blame the
they're
Jews.
they're angry at God. They can't get revenge at God, so they take it out on God's chosen people, us.
That's
And
fascinating.
and so to say, it's somewhat to say fair, that if a poor person comes up and says, you're a Jew, I had a bad life, no one ever gave me a chance, everything was rigged against me, I blame you, that's what it says in this week's parsha. It says that the cry of the orphan will be answered through the sword on us. It's kind of a weird verse like that.
Well, it's not
But
saying that I don't know the parsha this week, and you're more up on that than I am, but I don't think that it's saying that because that's
the single
right.
most common verse in the Torah, I think
Okay, but
is,
it's
and
not,
maybe next to Sabbath, is don't mistreat the orphan. And so to say
yeah,
that,
but the
and
idea that the
there's a
orphan
lot
would
of verses,
blame,
I think that's over 50 times, it says don't, I mean, a lot, don't the widow, convert, stranger, the orphan, although it doesn't always say convert. The most common, it always includes the orphan. And there's I think at least 10 different verses where
Mhm.
it says, if you should mistreat the orphan, there will be punishment. And in some cases, it doesn't even mention mistreating the orphan. It just mentions the cry of the orphan. That say, it doesn't mean that
Yeah,
me
but the
or
Jew
you
wasn't
as a
mistreating the
Jew did
orphan.
anything wrong to the orphan. It just means that there's an orphan out there that's suffering, that's a complaint against us. And I mean, it's a deep theology. It's really
Now,
the
is this
Jesus
something that
principle.
is this something that the rabbis have endorsed as something that's actually true? That if there's someone suffering in the world, the Jew is responsible for that because we're the chosen people? I mean, is this something that is, I mean, I get the fact that some people, you maybe, I mean, you actually, it does make sense to me
I
that
mean, it's the essential Jesus
people could
principle. They're
blame,
saying the Jewish people as Jesus, that we have to suffer for the sins of humanity. So if there's a
right, and
bunch of
that
orphans out
Christianity
there
put
that,
that on the head of Jesus, who was sacrificed for the sins of humanity.
by saying we don't
But
believe in Jesus, it's
no,
us. By saying it's the
and
Jewish
that the
people,
Jews are
it's
the
not
suffering
Jesus.
servant. I get that, but David, the thing is, did rabbis actually say that? Like, for example, this makes me think of a story that actually came out of Tunisia a while ago, where there was a situation where there was shark bites for people who were swimming in the beaches there. People were being attacked by sharks, and they somehow blamed the Israelis for this. That the Israelis had sent the sharks. So there was kind of a funny cartoon in an Israeli paper showing sharks with yarmulkes. I mean, it got to be that kind of idiocy, that the Jews are to blame for the suffering. The Jews are to be blamed for the misfortunes. I mean, I suppose in the Dark Ages, the Jews were blamed for the Black Plague because Jews were not dying as quickly because Jews were kosher, and they weren't eating pigs, which apparently were diseased. That they think that might be the cause. And so people saw the Jews not dying, and they thought, oh, the Jews are doing this. The point is that, I get the fact that people want an easy way to explain misfortune in their lives, even if they're not responsible for that misfortune, and they very well may be or not be. And they say, oh, okay, well, what about the Jews? They're responsible because, I suppose ultimately at its core, they're the chosen people. But then emanating out of that are all these weird conspiracy theories that we want to control the world and all that crap. But that doesn't mean that that's endorsed by the rabbis. I don't think they're saying that.
well, no, well, I think that's the effect. I mean, I'll read the verse because it's this week's parsha.
Okay.
Exodus 22:22. You must not afflict any widow or orphan. If you afflict them in any way and they cry to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my anger will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives will be widows, and your children will be fatherless.
Okay.
And so it's not saying like, I mean, the Kabbalists do talk about this, even the Talmud, there's stories about this, that, I mean, the cry of one orphan could destroy the nation. I mean, Bernie Sanders used to say that you measure society by how it treats the least of the people.
Yeah.
But saying that I mean, there's even verses about that, like burying the dead, that if there's a body, even a corpse that doesn't get buried, that it could cause the downfall of the whole
Oh yeah. No,
society. And I'm not saying that
absolutely.
like the
One-
conspiracy theory, that say they're not true, but there's a high price to being a Jew.
Yeah, but David,
And,
I don't make the
and people
connection.
have a right to
Connect the
blame their
dots for me
people.
here.
What was saying? People have the right to blame their suffering on us. So if a person,
I don't
if a
hear that
person's
there.
suffering, well, I saying people have a right to blame their suffering on God, and we're God's chosen
I
people.
don't
So
even think that's
people
true.
have a right to blame their suffering on us.
No,
And the same,
I don't get the connection there. Look, I get the fact that one person's suffering can affect an entire nation. Like, for example, it's the rape of Lucretia, right? That ended up leading to the Roman Empire because the Roman general whose daughter had been raped, he ended up becoming so angry about it that there was a war, and it ended up enthroning Augustus Caesar. The point is that the fact that the Jewish people are being told here, and we are reflective of all societies, and we are the chosen people, and that we're asked to observe a higher level of ethics and morals, that we are not to abuse the orphan. We are to take care of the weakest members of our society, and that if we do abuse the orphan, then we will suffer damnation. We'll suffer terrible dislocation. We will be to blame, and that could affect all of our society. And that we're to stand in that way as an example to other nations to do the same. But I think
that's the common element between Hitler and Stalin, that they were both orphans.
And they both abuse people. But the point is that,
well, I was saying that God listens to the cry of the orphan, not saying God forbid that Stalin or Hitler was righteous, but saying that God listens to the cry of the orphan.
Yeah, but what does that have? But the point is that the Jewish people didn't abuse Hitler and Stalin.
Well, I said we didn't have to abuse them, but it's saying that God listens to the suffering of the orphan.
So he takes it out of the Jews?
Well, just that our downfall was brought on by an orphan. It wasn't brought on by
but it wasn't
like
our
Trump. It was
orphan.
brought on. it was brought on
Our
by,
downfall could be brought on by an orphan amongst us, our own people, that is abused. And if that injustice is not answered, then you have a tearing apart of our society, both secular and religious, and it very well could lead to a downfall.
well, I
But
mean,
that doesn't mean that we're
theologically,
responsible for the whole world in that way. You know,
well,
an orphan, an
some
orphan
rabbis and
could,
Kabbalists do disagree and say, like, no, I mean, we are responsible for the suffering
of
of
every
other
orphan in the
people.
world.
And well, say any orphan in the world that God will hear their cries. And it's saying that
So if
if
an
they're
orphan in Mongolia suffers, we are responsible for that, or an orphan in Vietnam or
I mean, it's
India,
kind of
or
crazy theology, but say yes, that if that
I don't
God will
think that's
destroy the whole world if one single orphan's cry goes unanswered.
all
And
right.
that
Well, fine. I don't,
I mean,
you know,
I mean,
I'm not
if
going to
just
speak.
purely theology, I'm saying if you're thinking about it, I'm saying is that a tenet, would you accept that it's conceivable that that
It
is
is
what the
conceivable, but
Bible
what is
teaches, that
it
yes, one single orphan whose cry goes unanswered is enough that
is
God will
enough to
destroy.
destroy the world? Well, first of all, God, according to the Torah, God isn't going to destroy the world since the covenant of Noah and since the flood. One of
Well, I
the
mean, destroy the world like the flood, but like war
Well, that meant,
and
I mean, in the broad sense, that meant the world. It isn't just by flood. It meant that God would never again annihilate the entire world. That's what the rainbow symbolized. That's what the covenant of Noah was about. So it's not God, according to Jewish texts and according to theology, God is not going to destroy the world over anything. But you know, can a society become unhinged and the social order collapse because of the abuse of one person? Yes, that's why we have societies that have try to have equal justice. And if we uncover that kind of crime, that's why we're called upon as any secular society to punish the perpetrators so that it doesn't happen again, and so there can be some semblance of justice. But that's a
but is
far
it
cry from
sensical to you
blaming the
that
Jews.
that to say that no, I mean, that's kind of what our religion teaches, that yes, we are going to be to blame, and we should
For all
expect to
of
be
mankind.
blamed. Well, I was saying that we will be blamed for the suffering of humanity.
All right, well, I mean, I'll
And
have
saying
to,
that's what it means to be a
it's
Jew. Like,
very, it's,
okay, you might just want to hide your identity, white pass, get ahead, have the American dream. But it's saying that's really what it means to be a Jew, is to
all
be
right.
culpable for the suffering of
No, I mean, I
humanity.
don't, I'm
And
not
saying
going to,
that's the spirit, what I would say, of Sheldon Adelson, George Soros, really any Jew from
well,
like
the
a
point is
Chabad
that
perspective,
sometimes you can have a
even
Jew
the ADL
who
of
contributes to
universal
the suffering.
humanism. Well, I was saying I do support universal humanism, and that is the essential message of Judaism. That yeah, I mean, I don't want to see anybody suffering, and not because
No,
like I'm
no,
scared
I don't
of
think that I think that's a theme that everybody supports. All religions to varying degrees support that. All peoples support that. We don't want to see any human being suffer needlessly and unjustly. That's a matter of
well, I mean, the purpose
justice.
of the Bible is to scare us into action. I mean, saying that
Yeah.
if it's saying I'm quoting verses
Well,
and the Talmud, and to say that yes, we should be scared that some orphans' tears is going to cause our death, and so it's, I mean, it's
right.
kind of
No,
it's a
well,
passage, or so if it's a homiletic thing where it's saying you should care about the orphan, could be a good person, and so the Talmud, or even to Moses himself, you should care about the orphan, because if they cry out to God, God might bring the sword upon us.
I support that too, not as a Jew, but just as a human
But I'm
being. I
saying
mean,
theologically that's kind
I
of what the
support it
Torah teaches.
theologically that if we identify injustice in the world, we should try to make it right. I mean, as best we can.
It's kind of like Pope Francis. I mean, even like the modern day Pope, why he's so popular, taking that basic message, but saying, I mean, no, it comes from Moses. It comes from this week's
Yeah,
parsha about the being culpable for punishment for the suffering of the orphan.
fine. I mean, I think that if we knowingly ignore suffer injustice,
Do
whether
you
it
think it's
be
notable that Hitler and Stalin were orphans?
no, I don't think that. I mean,
You
first of
don't think
all,
that? I mean,
what do you
if
mean
you
they were
had to put one
orphans? You
thing,
mean
like,
one of their parents died? I mean, how do you mean they were
well,
orphans?
I'm saying that why was Hitler or
Well, first of all,
Stalin?
what do you mean
I'm
they
not
were?
defending their actions, because
I know,
like
but
being orphan doesn't mean you could become a criminal and a
well, by
horrible,
the way,
mass murderer. But it's saying that
I
the
haven't
most,
heard, I don't know enough about their biography, but I don't think they were orphans. I mean, I think Hitler's mother died when he was a teenager or something. His father died when
father
he was,
died when he was very young, and
no,
his
his
mother
father,
died when
when
he
his
was a
father
teenager.
died, he inherited a pension, his father's pension. He lived quite lavishly while he was a young communist in Vienna. I don't
But I
know
mean, by
about
the time he was
Stalin.
15, he had no parents. I believe Stalin
I
also
don't
was saying
know,
if
but I
that's the
mean, I don't
most
know if that makes much difference.
determinative factor. If you say what, you know, even from the Judaic point of view, that the most determinative factor in Hitler's biography was that he was an orphan.
I don't know about that. I mean,
It is the single most mentioned mitzvah in the Torah is to look after the orphan.
well, maybe somebody should have looked after Hitler. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's saying that that's, I
What
think
does that
it's,
have to do with, I mean, or Stalin? The fact they grew up and then they were mass murderers? I mean, that was
well, it's
because
saying
they
that you
didn't look
can't
after
fight
them? I mean,
anti-Semitism, is saying that you see that, yeah, there's crazy people who believe in conspiracy theories and they can't be reasoned with in their irrational, and saying that you can't fight anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism is really the cry of the orphan. Like the knock on the door is the cry of the orphan. That's the point I'm making. That
well,
the
I think
reason
that it's not
anti-Semitism is
necessarily
rising
the cry of
is
the
because
orphan.
there's a lot of orphans out there
It's a
crying to
cry on
God.
somebody who resents the fact that they're not successful and often at their own hand, and they want to blame someone else. I mean, I don't think that Hitler was he was quite successful. He had a pension from his parents. I mean, he was
An
living
orphan
very
doesn't, I'm not
well.
saying it
He
exonerates
never
him from
worked a
his
day in his
crimes,
life.
but it's saying that it's probably the most.
He wasn't abused as an orphan, even if he was. And the point is that you have people who are, they're just are not successful as human beings, and they look to blame someone other than themselves for their failures. And so, who is more convenient? It gets to the
Well,
seven
it's saying
deadly,
it's going to be us.
which is wrong, and it gets to the seven
Well, I'm
deadly
saying it's not
sins.
going to be really. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, it's saying like the
It
Bible, the
could be
Torah
us. I
says
don't
it's going to
know.
be us. You're saying like
That will be blamed for everyone else's problems in the world.
we'll be blamed for other people's suffering,
Yeah, but they're
and saying
suffering.
that's the price of being a
Depends on
Jew.
how you define
Well, I'm saying that's the
suffering.
price of being a Jew. That
Yeah,
is
but
saying there's a lot of
there's a
reward and benefit
corruption.
to being a Jew, but the price of being a Jew is we get blamed for other people's suffering.
Yeah, but it
And,
depends,
and
I
what you to
suppose.
say it's wrong is almost
No,
heretical. You
what I
say
would,
like that's the
I didn't
verse.
say it was
You're
wrong.
arguing with
I
the
would
verse in
say
this week's
that it
parsha.
depends on how you define suffering. Suffering could mean that you live in a house on a street, and you look down the house and you see some guy who has more money than you have, who has a prettier wife than you have, who has a better car than you have, and you feel envious that he has more than you have, and you want to stop him because it bothers you. It makes you look at your own inadequacies. So what do? You blame the Jews, or you blame, you want the government to become socialist so it redistributes the wealth and it gives you a piece of his action. Why? Because you want it, because you're suffering over envy and greed. It depends on how you define suffering. Now, if someone is suffering as a result of some real injustice, like that that's something that all society has to address, and that the Jews are in the lead on that. We always have been, going back to the days of Sinai, that we do try to stand up for the suffering of the weak. That's what the whole Amalek thing was about. Amalek attacked the rear of the caravan, where you had women and children and elderly and people who were lame, and it created genuine suffering. It was so unjust. It was such a tearing apart of the social order that we felt obligated to stop that and to totally end that. And so, we do try to call out that kind of evil. If you have such injustice, we call it out. I don't think that George Soros supporting district attorneys who let people out on bail so they could murder ladies at the Waukesha Christmas parade, that's not my idea of addressing justice, or
Yeah,
taking
but
out
calling it out is not
President
enough.
Trump,
I mean, saying
the most successful president since FDR. That's not my idea of justice.
yeah, but saying
Justice,
calling it out doesn't mean anything. I mean, say if society's collapsing
well, more than
and
calling
there's
it out,
people who
trying
have
to
no
recompense it,
people
trying
have no
to,
way to get ahead, not just like jealousy, wanting what other people have, but like Trump said, it's rigged. Like there is no way to get ahead,
no, he didn't say that. Trump
and the
said the
system
opposite.
is corrupted.
No,
And
Trump said that you can get ahead in this country if you're willing to work hard and if you're willing to create your life. That's the American way under God.
but I'm saying if that's not
We're
the
not going to
case,
be equal, but it's not unjust for someone to have more than their neighbor. That's not injustice. That's a communist idea of injustice. Injustice is if someone is actively if their rights, their personal rights are actively violated. and that they are harmed directly because of who they are. That's injustice. It's, being poor is not injustice. You're not entitled to property, but if you're physically raped or attacked or beaten, that's injustice. That's why we have
Why does the
system
Bible
of justice.
why does the Bible focus on the orphan as like the ultimate injustice?
Because the orphan is probably the most vulnerable member of any society because they don't have anyone to watch out for them. They are, in a sense, in American understanding, maybe I get this from reading objectivist ideas. The most vulnerable member of any society is the individual. And the most vulnerable individual is an orphan because they have no family. They're alone. And so they're an example of someone who is going to be vulnerable to injustices because they are weak. And that a moral society is a society that takes care of their weak members, their elderly, their children. They protect the innocence of their children. They protect the lives of their elderly. They don't put COVID-19 people in nursing homes so that they'll die, like what Cuomo did. That's immoral. We have, the moral idea is to protect the most vulnerable, and the orphan represents that. Anyway, David, we're kind of reaching toward the end of the time here. Good talk.
Yeah, so that's my take on anti-Semitism. Like saying that you can't fight anti-Semitism
You
because
can fight it.
the root cause of, well, I'm saying the root cause of anti-Semitism is suffering, and people blaming their suffering on the Jews, and even to say that when you identify, I mean, according to our own text, like that, we have to accept that when I call myself a Jew or you call yourself a Jew,
Taking
that
on
to some extent that you're saying you could blame your suffering on me, because that's what our book says. So that's, you look at anti-Semitism like that. I self-identify as a Jew, as God's chosen people, so to say, as God's representative here on earth. And the downside of that is that people to some extent have the right to blame their suffering on us.
Let me just take that again. I mean, from a more secular Jewish standpoint, I think, first of all, as I said, it depends on how you define suffering. I think that suffering, the very identification of the orphan implies that suffering is a person who is vulnerable, who is weak, who doesn't have the infrastructure to support them, like a family, like an institution. They're alone in the world. And it's not somebody who's just hates their neighbor because they're richer than they are. That's not suffering. It might be personal suffering, but it's not the right kind of suffering. It's suffering based on envy and greed. Genuine suffering.
So they didn't properly have someone to teach them right from wrong, and they were taught right from wrong largely from society. So the orphan is symbolic of what society teaches the person, because
the orphan is a real
orphans
thing.
are raised by larger society, and so the orphan is God's barometer for humanity. That's what the Bible chooses to use as the barometer, is the orphan, because the orphan is raised by society. It's the indicator of how society treats the weak.
But but that's right, David. The orphan represents the most vulnerable member of any society in the world because they have no infrastructure, and it is the moral obligation of a society to protect its weakest members. Now, as Jews, we, as the chosen people, we have a more direct revelation about this from Sinai. We feel an extra level of responsibility to try to encourage that kind of moral and ethical standard for the world. That's why we're supposed to be a light unto the nations. Now, if to the degree that we're to be blamed when a society, or for that matter, when we don't do that job, when we don't watch out for the orphan, we are, if it's identified, we should. I don't know if that means that maybe we're not doing our job by advocating enough, by teaching enough, by living the example enough, we try to be educated and we try to stand up as a moral exemplar by doing this in our own lives. I think if we take care of our own house, then other nations will be inspired by that, just like other nations are inspired by the example of the United States, which to a very high degree does this and always has, more so than any society in history. So yeah, we have an obligation to teach this. I'm not sure that we are to blame if it doesn't happen unless we're directly complicit in it, or in a broader sense, if we have not properly conveyed this and taught this and advocated it. So yeah, we should advocate societies that have systems of justice that protect and that have a culture that protects the most vulnerable members. That's an American thing. I mean, I think America is very, I remember E. Michael Jones said to me that America is very, and in his book, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, he says America is very Jewish. He's right.
Well, from a
I'm
spiritual
proud to
level,
take that one on.
I mean, if you believe if you take the Torah and the so to say status, of the high cost of being a Jew, it is related to what we do, and it is our fault. And saying
Well,
that
it's
like no,
related to what we
say
do.
we're a Jew. I mean, my rabbi said that in Israel. Remember, they say that constantly. You're saying that what happens here is parallel to what happens around the world, and the Maimonides and I mean these are deep mystical teachings to say, like what happens in our own heart is some sort of parallel to what's happening around the whole world, or suffering somewhere like in Africa or India is directly related to our own personal struggle. But I think that is the essential message of Chabad, of Judaism in general. I mean, the straight verse is straight out. It's and probably even said, like, I would say George Soros and Sheldon Adelson. That's why I'm like, I don't think there's a contradiction to say. I would say that the main motivating factor in basically all Jews, at least according to like Chabad and Hasidus, is our Judaism. And like, if it's Sheldon Adelson or George Soros or anybody, they say like, no, I mean, that's the main motivating factor, even though they might take a completely different
Even though they
approach.
might be very misguided in their application of that motivation.
Well, you
As
judge them
the case
favorably
in
that they're
First
trying to,
World.
so to say, repair the world according to the best of their understanding and knowledge, or personal flaws. But saying that no, I mean, both of those people are trying to repair the world according to the best of their understanding,
That's right, but
minus our personal flaws.
yeah, but David, I would
I mean, if you look
suggest,
in the mirror to say like, okay, I judge you favorably, I judge all you're trying to repair the world to the best of your ability, minus our personal shortcomings.
I understand that, but I think it's safe to say that their approach is extremely misguided. They haven't studied the actual moral and ethical precepts of the Torah and the respect for the individual. They're interested in physical control of the world.
So I'm just saying, what I'm
And
saying is
that's,
minus their own personal shortcomings, that
well, it's
they
more than
have that
shortcoming.
essential desire to repair the world, that's the essential
Yeah, but
motivating factor of all Jews,
look at
minus our own
I'm
personal
sure that
shortcomings.
Adolf Hitler felt that he was repairing the world
But he
too.
wasn't Jewish. I'm saying that's the
Doesn't matter.
essential.
They say, Jew or non-Jew, there are visions for how to repair the world, and some of them are very wrong. We need to understand.
Well, I mean,
But
that's not what the Kabbalah or Hasidus even said. That's the unique feature of the Jewish soul. That
but I
saying
understand,
if
but the Jewish soul
E.
might be,
Michael Jones is going to have the negative, anti-Semitic, anti-logos view that Jews are fighting logos, I'm taking the philo-Semitic Hasidic view that's saying it's the unique feature of the Jew,
and I agree with
that all
that.
Jews essentially deep down, our motivating factor is to repair
I
the world.
agree that
Although
it
we're
is.
flawed people, and you could see it in the flaw, and say that not necessarily that all people period, just that's
So
God
let's
forbid,
let's take a look.
if you want to
Look,
call it an anti-Semitic trope, but
no,
like
I
that's
would
what the Kabbalah
I would say
that's just Jews. It's unique about the
it
Jewish
is
soul.
unique about the Jewish soul. I would say that our mission is to repair the world. We also have Jewish individuals and Jewish movements that have that while they
And we're all
believe,
flawed people.
let
I
me
mean,
just say
we're
this.
still flawed people.
It's more than flawed. They believed that they were repairing the world, but they had fallen away from it, and they actually were engaging in destruction. And I would point to the Torah on this one, if I may. If you look at the trajectory of the Jewish people from the very time of Sinai, when Aaron built the golden calf at the foot of Sinai, at the moment when we were at the highest level spiritually, that God was revealing the Torah to Moses, we were also at the lowest level spiritually, because the building of the golden calf and all of the practices around that were the antithesis of repairing the world. And yet I don't doubt that the Jews involved in those practices believed that they were repairing the world. And if you look at the trajectory from that time right up to the Roman times, actually, or right up to the destruction of the first temple, really, you see that the Jewish people would go through periods where they would know God, they would be closer to God, and they would be repairing the world, they would be preparing themselves, and they would be a light unto the nations. And then you saw other periods where they strayed away from knowing God, and they were believing in earthly idols, and they were believing in graven images, and they were engaging in all of the sinful activity around that. And that's when they would be punished by God, and that God would come down and eventually finally destroy the first temple. So just because we have that vision, and that is a part of our soul, of knowing God and all of the moral and ethical precepts that emanate from God, the abstract aspect of existence, the soul, it doesn't mean that we can also not be the opposite and put our energy in a negative way that is destructive to the world. Karl Marx is an example of a Jew who developed a system that was destructive to the world, I would argue. Other Jews as well. Shabtai Zvi comes to mind. I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, the Hasidus is still gets their Karl Marx, Shabtai Zvi is still their essential nature was being shown that there was to repair the world.
That was their motivation.
Flaws or nature, but saying, no, I mean, Karl Marx, obviously, you could see that there was a deep desire to repair the world as seen through a motivating factor in his thought, even if it didn't work out that way.
As I said, that was also
obviously Shabbatai Zvi. You don't become a false messiah without a strong desire to repair the world.
But there's a strong desire to repair the world by a lot of movements that are not Jewish. As I said, Hitler believed he was repairing the world by purifying it of Jews and other people. Stalin believed he was repairing the world by getting rid of the bourgeoisie and by getting rid of the classes as making the perfected world. You know, the point I'm making here is that repairing the world is a basic motivation, certainly for Jews.
So. I mean, I don't think you could read that. I mean,
so
even the nationalists, they didn't necessarily.
They believed in what they were doing. Universal
humanism.
Yes, they did.
Or world vision. It was more.
You can't get more universal than communism. Nazism also very universal. Hitler spoke about the new social order in Europe that would become led by this enlightened people, the Aryans, who would become a new species physically, would become this whole modern transhumanist movement has an element of that too. The idea that you can repair the world, we don't have an exclusive on that. That's a movement that exists in Christianity. It's a movement that exists in the Far East. There are movements of people who believe that they are genuinely trying to repair the world, and they really believe that. So, you have to put content into it, and you have to look at whether or not their desire to repair the world is consonant, first of all, with reality itself, but secondly, with the interest of the orphan and the individual and the good society. I mean, do you think that Hitler or Stalin or any of these people who were trying to create this utopia, do you think they cared about the orphan? I mean, I guess the thing I'm trying to say here is that, we all want to repair the world. And
I'm not saying they're altruistic. I mean, saying that they returned. I mean, really, they were a vehicle of God's curse. They're saying that.
Well, so aren't Jews who do these things? They are vehicles because they have rejected the moral and ethical precepts of Sinai.
I'm saying they were able to return on humanity the cold, dark world that they as orphans felt themselves. So when they saw people suffering like that, it didn't bother them because as orphans, that's how they viewed the world. Even, God forbid, the Holocaust, the worst depths of it are Stalin, all the death and murder and torturing. That to say, as an orphan, that's how he saw the world. That's how. When he saw people dying and suffering, he was like, "Well, that's just kind of how things work. Like, trust me, I'm an orphan. That's how I see the world."
Well, because they felt that they were doing it for the greater good. They thought we're getting rid of
greater good. That was probably the reality that they felt. That
probably
that they were a vehicle of destruction.
No, they
because
probably
what their eyes saw
You know
melted
something,
upon the
David, I
world
actually,
was the suffering that they
no, I
thought
disagree. I don't,
was
first of all,
normal. You're just
first of
like,
all, they
a
didn't,
person is violent because they were beat by their dad, or they were beat down by the world, and they think it's normal to be beat down like that because
no,
that was their
I think
childhood
that they felt,
experience. So that was, that's why the destruction of humanity, World War II, was delivered to us by orphans, because they thought that sort of suffering was
well,
natural, because that was indicative of how they saw the world, or how the world treated them. I mean, he's saying
yeah,
Donald Trump
I think that's a
doesn't
fact.
feel that Donald Trump, he's not an orphan. He took high birth. He doesn't see that. I mean, he might have had a tough upbringing, but saying like, no, it takes an orphan to look at the world in that negative a way, and to just be like, I don't care about these people suffering. That's the way the world treated
That
me,
may be,
and I'm
although
glad to see the world treat, like that's fairness. To their
I
eyes,
think you're
that's fair.
generalizing
To the
on orphans,
orphan, that's
I say.
to the orphan, the suffering of others, God forbid, is a sense of fairness. So it's not a repairing of the world; it's a sharing of the suffering, and saying that my justice, God forbid, as someone who suffered unjustly, will be to see other people suffer unjustly.
Well, first of all, I don't think that Hitler and Stalin even saw what they did as causing suffering. They never actually toured the gulag or the concentration camp. They shielded themselves from that. They probably were in a state of denial over that. And they believed that what they were doing was good and moral. They believed, the communist movement believes that by creating a world order where everyone is de facto equal, they are doing good regardless of whether or not they have killed hundreds of millions of people. They believe that the ultimate goal is good. This is why they're doing
Well,
it.
they had a
Not
goal. I'm
because-
saying the goal was to get revenge for the world
That may
mistreating them.
be, but that I don't
I
think
mean, it
that
was
this.
general. I mean, saying
I
that
think
first.
that's an
I mean,
interesting
I
psychological
mean,
look
saying
at it.
that. I'm not saying it's an altruistic goal, but it's a factual element. And for whatever reason, the Torah says that God will help them. The orphan who is mistreated, God will help them get revenge against the world.
The Torah says that God will help them get revenge against the world.
But it's what it said. It said that God
Where does
will
it say
get.
that?
But it's Exodus 22:22, that if you mistreat the orphan, God will turn the sword against us and cause us to be orphans.
So, but it doesn't say that the orphan himself or herself is going to be the instrument of revenge.
Well, I mean, the verse says that God answers the orphan's prayers,
It says that we will be,
answers the orphan's
if we
cries.
become an immoral people and we ignore the most vulnerable members of our society,
That
it's
our
going to come,
children will be turned into
yeah,
orphans.
it's going to come back to us because we will be have come corrupted to the point where we'll be weak and we will
In
suffer.
Hebrew, like a mita
Suffer.
keneged mita, that
I think
like an
that's,
eye for an eye, that do like the orphan cried out and had nobody but God to answer their cry, and so in return for the orphan's cry, that our kids will be turned into orphans, God forbid.
yeah. I mean, I think that, but I think in the broader sense, it's that if
If
we,
that makes sense, that Hitler or Stalin was the orphan that cried out that no one answered. And
yeah,
so
look, I mean, we're talking, it's
God
possible.
answered, God forbid, God answered Hitler and Stalin's cry by turning millions of people's kids into orphans.
No, look, I think that you're talking about something psychological here about orphanage and about people who feel that
It's
they,
a straight verse, Exodus 22:22, that if no one answers the orphan's cry, God will answer the orphan's cry and turn our kids into orphans. I mean, straight up what the verse says.
so, all right, I mean, look, I mean, I'm looking at this
I mean,
thing.
do you disagree that,
No,
that's a
let
message
me,
that the Bible
yeah,
teaches,
let me
that if
just,
the orphan cries out and no one answers, God will answer the orphan's cry by turning our kids into orphans, God forbid.
I think that I'm looking at this thing more metaphorically as opposed to being fundamental, which you're being. I look at it as being that the orphan represents the most vulnerable person in a society, the person that has no family. And that a society that doesn't take care of that orphan, or at least provide some basic means for the person to have a level of comfort and freedom, if a society ignores that person, then that society will rue the day and that orphan will grow up and take revenge on that society. I don't know if I go so fundamental. Judaism is not we're not fundamentalists generally. We have the whole idea of a Talmud is we don't look at everything so literally and that this is the way it is. We have commentary, we put things in a broader context and we look at the moral and ethical elements that are trying to be conveyed here. as you say, we don't have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, literally. We understand that that is conveying to us that what this person did by locking out someone's eye is a terrible crime, and that there has to be justice that is approximate, but doesn't necessarily have to be literal. You don't pull their eye out, you bring them to court and they go to jail, or you get money, or you do something to at least symbolically level the scale of justice somewhat, with the understanding that you can't go back and rewrite history. So I look at this thing a little bit more societally, in that if we abuse our most vulnerable members in our society, they'll come back and bite us. Look, if you have some poor kid, a black kid, I don't know, in the inner city, who's an orphan and who's growing up on the streets and who's passed around between people who may not have his best interests at heart and who might be drug dealers, who might be bad people, he might grow up and take revenge on society by being violent and by killing people. Or a white kid, I don't mean this to be, I'm sorry if I'm using a metaphor here, I didn't mean it that way, but I'm simply pointing out that, yeah, I mean, if a person is in a society, if a society is not have the basic morality and the basic structures to take care of their most vulnerable members, then that society will suffer from that in the future. And that person very well may get revenge. And that does God have a hand in that? Yeah. If a society is that immoral, then they will fall the same way that the state of Judah fell under Manasseh, who was an evil king, that they went under. And then they came back when Josiah became king, his son, who was a good king. I'm just saying, if you have a government, if you have a society that becomes corrupted by evil and by neglect and by a culture of immorality, then they're going to end up suffering from that in the future. So I don't necessarily view this as literally. I'm not a fundamentalist, as I say. Jews are not, I don't think. We generally have never been. Like, I mean, even this thing, I'm about to be interviewed with T-Jump. I mean, you were interviewed with him. I was thinking about this because his thing is, prove to me that God exists. Show your evidence. We don't do that in Judaism. We don't, in fact, it contradicts, we believe in God, we assume there is a God, we accept God, and we try to understand God, and we declare God as existing. We declare it every day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. But to take the next step and try to prove God, it actually contradicts the whole concept, because God's supernatural. God is not in the natural world.
I told him that. I mean, I argued basic karma, and he rejected karma. There's actually only one place in the Torah that it says you could test God and should test God, and that's through charity. That God promises that if you give charity, that you'll get that back and more. And in fact, you're encouraged to test God through the giving of charity. I have to look up the exact verse, but the verse explicitly says to test God through the giving of charity, that you'll get back that and more. But that would be some sort of principle of saying that I argue that the good get rewarded and the wicked get punished, and that is and I don't know if, I mean, if I had some influence in saying you can't fight anti-Semitism because the essential cause of anti-Semitism is, so to say, the cry of the orphan. So you say that it's you could even look at it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but just saying that you can't fight anti-Semitism because it's really like mentally disturbed, homeless people, poor people that are just taking out their pain upon the Jews. And some, if you want to metaphorically say that the cause of anti-Semitism is the cry of the orphan.
All right, but and we should wrap it up soon. All I'll say is that the orphan is a very literal definition of a person who is the most vulnerable person in society due to no fault of their own. I mean, when you're an orphan, you didn't kill your parents. And if you did, that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody who has been abandoned because of the death of their parents, and they don't have a family, and they are the most vulnerable. The people that are blaming the Jews are not orphans. They are people who just have screwed up their own lives and who are looking to blame someone else for that. That's what we can identify. That is not inevitable to us. that's where you can develop a set of ideals that refute that and that say you take responsibility for your own life. And if you fail, that's on you. That's not on anyone else. Anyway, David, what do you have coming up this week?
Yeah, well, I say that repair the world. We have an obligation to live in
To
a just
repair the
society,
orphan,
and
not
saying
not for the not for
if
the loser.
society is not just,
Yeah,
that
I
we're
agree.
going to be, we're going to get the blame, whether, so to say, we it's our
Okay.
fault or not.
Well,
Um,
yeah, but the thing is, we have to identify what is just and what is real. Anyway, David, what do you have coming up this week in terms of interviews?
so so this guy in India reached out to me about reincarnation. So it actually got uh, 150 views or something in India, talking about the Judaic concept in reincarnation. It was kind of interesting. I shared that on my social media, and then I interviewed on my channel the prolific author on Vedic science and Vedic cosmologies in India. I read a bunch of his books, so it's not political. It was completely about um, kind of like the Vedic Hindu understanding of science and spirituality, and saying that kind of from like a Kabbalistic Hasidic view, that they're not a differential, like the science of the material world and the science of the spiritual world is considered one and the same. So it was pretty interesting. Maybe not so much to the viewers here, but the type it more spiritual Hindu. This maybe to some of the viewers here might be interesting. I reached out. I started reaching out for some interviews just because I was getting tired. Like the only people who seem to want to talk to me are like counter Semites. God forbid, those are the only people who like reach out to. Even like Paul texts me. He's like, God forbid. He's like, I'm gonna set you up for like Ryan Dawson. And it's like, okay, like, like, I mean, no offense, like to Ryan, like I wasn't that excited to speak to like, like the, the anti-Semite of the week, or even if he's, but whatever. So I started reaching out, to actual people that I find their work interesting. So Sunday, there's a genre of what they call like American frontier people that go around filming themselves exploring abandoned buildings. And we've talked a lot about that here on the State of Americans Infrastructure. So there's a YouTube page. He's actually got more subs than me, 5,000 subs. He's been doing it years, called American Decay uh, uh, Urban Frontiermen. And they go around the US exploring abandoned buildings. And they did like 70 videos in Detroit. Detroit is actually like the playground for of this genre of people that come to explore abandoned buildings.
Well,
Detroit is
the
actually
city has a
become,
lot of abandoned, the whole neighborhoods are abandoned.
yeah. So I
It sounds
reached out to,
creepy.
I commented on his video. I reached out to him, asked him for an interview. I told him I'm a civil engineer in training, and
Mhm.
like like I went to yeshiva, like I want to like buy and rehab and become a landlord or something. But these are kind of just like urban frontiermen that find it interesting
Cool.
to explore but they make these interesting videos. So I figured just interview him and find out what interests them, or just some sort of maybe insight on America, someone that's been going around filming and abandoning all these
Interesting.
abandoned, decayed buildings. And he does some historic so that's Sunday at 2 o'clock. So
That's cool.
hopefully, yeah, maybe even if it's interesting, I could set him up for your show also.
Definitely. See if you can maybe get Ryan Dawson on with you and I.
I'm not like, as I said, like Paul texted me, and like I'm not going to reach out to Ryan to speak
Okay.
to him. Like I don't mind speaking to him, that's what I do. But like saying like, no, I mean like that, like like I'm more interested in like Hinduism or
Sure.
civil
I
engineering. But
mean,
like I'll speak to him
I
if
sent him a note, but I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to
I
pursue
did
him,
go in the chat because I was going to watch your show, and he said he was going to speak with you, but
but he didn't
Paul
do it.
emailed him, and I mean, God forbid, like Paul's kind of like I mean, he's a philo Semite. I think he's like marrying a Jewish woman, but he believes in these conspiracy theories. I used to speak to him on the phone,
Yeah. No,
and
I know.
he could go on for hours and hours, and he's like Ryan Dawson. Like he'll give me names and information about like people I never even heard about.
Right. I know.
But like, yeah, I'll do it. But like, I'm not reaching out to
Okay.
that like but yeah, I mean maybe it makes more sense for us to do it together. So I told Paul that we could do it together, or he could go solo.
Right. Yeah, but I think if
Either
we're
way
going
is
to do
fine.
it, we should do it together. But
We
anyway,
might if we could book him for next Thursday. He's going to be
yeah.
on Politically Provoked on Sunday, and God forbid he's
Where can
probably
I
going to.
see them now that they've been kicked off YouTube?
and Odyssey, they had Richard
Odyssey.
Spencer on this week. They had like 300 viewers.
Okay.
They've actually increased their viewership. So I think you also, although like I mentioned, Ryan Dawson, like he was interactive with the chat. Like I just went to his page, I saw he was streaming, and I was in the chat, like like I mentioned your name. He was like, yeah, I'm going to talk with Charles. So I think that we have you have to have one platform where you're going to be interactive, so that if someone just wants to message you when you're live, that you're going to see
Well,
that.
they can message me on Rumble. I mean, I am live on Rumble and I can be messaged there. In fact, let me
Um,
just see if I
yeah.
have
So
any
so
Rumble.
unfortunately, politically provoked has taken quite, they seem to have narrow casted themselves of a counter-Semitic audience, but they've got some big names and numbers, so that they're getting they're probably the biggest platform hosting counter Semites now. Getting a few hundred viewers.
Right.
They got all the big names. People I never even heard of that. So like God forbid, like it's scary to see like I don't even watch or talk to them, because like no one likes me there. And like they blame me for their problems. So it's just
Oh, yeah, that's not good. Anyway, David, listen, thanks a lot as always. Let's let's do it again next week. And please, if anybody wants to come on with me, they're welcome.
okay, great. Shabbat shalom.
All right, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.